Imagine this: you're sitting across from someone. The light is soft, the wine half full, your conversation drifts between music, travel, and childhood memories. On the surface, everything seems perfect, yet suddenly a strange realization hits you. You're not really talking to them, you're talking to a projection of your own creation. That gentle smile is your longing to be understood. That comforting voice is your own loneliness echoing back at you. You think you're searching for love, but in truth, you're trying to fix the part of yourself that's already broken. The tragedy of modern love isn't that we don't know how to love, it's that we've lost ourselves inside the very idea of it. We replace sincerity with desire, build fragile intimacy out of illusions, and hide our deep emptiness behind momentary pleasure. Love has ceased to be the meeting of souls. It's become an experiment in self-confirmation, a theater of anxiety, expectation, and control. Have you noticed how our language about love sounds increasingly mechanical? Compatibility, algorithmic matching, emotional value, relationship management. These sound more like business terms than the vocabulary of the heart. We tell ourselves we become more rational, but really, we've just grown more afraid of being hurt. The apparent abundance of love in the information age conceals a deep emotional famine. People meet more than ever before, yet understand each other less and less. You say you want to be loved, but when someone truly gets close, you recall, question, and test. You say you crave stability, yet feel suffocated once you find it. We repeat the same approach withdrawal cycle endlessly, like a psychological tug of war with no resolution. Every act of closeness tears at our emotional defenses. Every breakup is an unfinished attempt at healing. Perhaps the real issue of modern love isn't how to love, but who is doing the loving. The you shaped by anxiety, trauma, and social expectation is the one falling in love, but the deeper, truer self has never actually been involved. You seek love as redemption, forgetting that redemption requires awareness first. So maybe the question isn't about love at all, but about illusion. Is what we call love today truly a connection between two souls, or a cultural hallucination we've been taught to chase? Do we still long to understand each other, or merely to feel seen enough to believe we exist? Maybe the collapse of modern love doesn't begin when someone leaves, it begins the moment we lose the connection to ourselves. Once we forget how to live peacefully in solitude, we also forget how to meet another human being without fear, without pretense, without masks. So the real question is, when modern love collapses, do we lose love itself, or do we lose ourselves? This isn't a romantic question. It's an existential one. Love, as we understand it today, is no longer a meeting of two souls. It's a reflection of a collective neurosis. We fall in love not because we see the other clearly, but because we see in them the missing fragments of ourselves. Carl Jung called this projection. When the unconscious seeks wholeness by casting its unhealed parts onto another person, you meet someone, and instantly you feel a connection. But that connection is often the echo of your own forgotten self. You don't fall in love with them, you fall in love with what your psyche believes they can restore. And that's the beginning of the tragedy. Because sooner or later, the projection fades. The other person stops fulfilling the fantasy, and suddenly you feel betrayed. The warmth turns cold, the magic disappears. You begin to ask, what changed? But the truth is, nothing changed, only your illusion did. You never really saw them. You only saw yourself reflected in their eyes until the mirror cracked. Modern culture, however, encourages this illusion. From movies to dating apps, everything around you whispers, find your other half. You are told love will complete you, that happiness lies outside yourself. This myth of the missing piece is ancient, but the digital age has weaponized it. The more incomplete you feel, the more desperate you become to fill that void with another person, with validation, with constant attention. Friedrich Nietzsche warned that when a culture loses its spiritual foundation, it replaces transcendence with desire. That's what's happening now. Love has become our new religion, and heartbreak is inevitable ritual. We no longer seek God, we seek intensity. We want someone to make us feel alive, even if that aliveness burns us to ashes. The irony is cruel. The more we chase connection, the lonelier we become. Social media convinces you that you are surrounded by options, but options are not intimacy. When love becomes a marketplace, people become products. We brand ourselves with carefully curated versions, perfect smiles, clever captions, performative vulnerability. We say, I want to be loved for who I am, while constantly editing who that I is. But beneath all this performance lies fear, the fear of being ordinary, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of being seen and still not being chosen. You think love will erase this fear, but it doesn't. It only amplifies it. Because love, real love, demands exposure. It asks you to show the parts of yourself you've spent years hiding even from yourself. That's why many people unconsciously sabotage their relationships. The moment love gets too close, it triggers the inner alarm. I might be seen. I might be rejected. I might lose control. So you start pulling away. You pick fights, withdraw emotionally, test loyalty, anything to protect the fragile illusion of safety. You call it self-protection, but it's actually self-destruction. Arthur Schopenhauer once compared love to a cruel cosmic joke. Nature, he said, uses love to ensure reproduction while deceiving individuals into believing they're seeking happiness. But what if, in our era, that deception has evolved? What if love now serves not biology, but ego, the endless hunger to be validated, admired, mirrored? That's why modern love feels so unstable. It's built not on truth, but on the pursuit of emotional consumption. We consume people the way we consume content, fast, intensely, and without depth. When the dopamine fades, we scroll to the next. We call this freedom, but it's a disguised form of spiritual emptiness. And deep down, you feel it, don't you? The ache after the high, the silence after the messages stop, the hollow feeling of being surrounded by attention, yet untouched by understanding. You start to suspect that love in this age has become less about intimacy and more about distraction, a way to avoid sitting alone with yourself. But if that's true, then the collapse of modern love is not a social failure. It is a psychological awakening, a sign that something deeper within us is calling to be healed. Jung would say that our relationships are mirrors for the inner work we refuse to do alone. Every failed romance, every unreciprocated feeling, every emotional collapse, it all points back to the same place, the unconscious asking to be made conscious. Maybe love isn't dying. Maybe it's shedding its illusions. Maybe what's collapsing isn't love itself, but everything falls that we've built around it. You don't notice the collapse at first. It doesn't arrive with explosions or endings. It seeps in quietly, like a subtle erosion of meaning. Conversations become shorter. Intimacy turns into negotiation. Love becomes a word people use when they want something. What once felt sacred now feels like a transaction. You tell yourself this is normal. Everyone is busy. Everyone is tired. Everyone is healing. But beneath that surface of polite detachment, something darker grows, a collective numbness. The world has become so overstimulated that we've forgotten how to feel. You can see it everywhere. People lying next to each other, both scrolling through strangers' faces, couples measuring affection, emojis, dating reduced to swipes and algorithms. The language of connection has been replaced by the syntax of efficiency. We don't meet each other anymore, we consume each other. And when someone no longer satisfies our craving for novelty, we move on, calling it self-care. It's easy to blame technology, but the problem runs deeper. The real issue is that modern love mirrors the structure of modern life. Fast, fragmented, performative. You've been taught to optimize everything: your time, your body, your productivity. Love, too, has become something to manage. You analyze it, strategize it, schedule it between tasks. You call it emotional intelligence, but it's just control disguised as wisdom. And yet, control is the very opposite of intimacy. To truly love someone means surrender to uncertainty, to vulnerability, to the risk of pain. But in an age that worships certainty, surrender feels like death. So instead of loving, we curate. Instead of trusting, we test. Instead of feeling, we perform. The consequence is quiet, but devastating. A generation that knows everything about communication, but nothing about connection. Psychologically, this fragmentation feeds on insecurity. Jung once said, loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. That's the essence of modern despair. We are surrounded by people, yet starved of resonance. You speak, but no one really listens. You reach out, but what you touch is a reflection, not a presence. The more disconnected we become, the more desperate we get for attention. Attention, after all, is the new currency of love. We chase it, trade it, hoard it. But attention without understanding is empty. It's like sunlight without warmth. It illuminates nothing. You can have hundreds of people watching your life unfold online, yet feel unseen in the one place that matters, within yourself. And that's where the self-destruction begins. When love loses its depth, you start confusing stimulation for intimacy. You crave constant validation, mistaking it for connection. You start to believe that to be loved, you must perform a version of yourself that others will not abandon. You smile when you want to scream. You stay silent when you want to be known. You shrink your soul to fit the frame. This quiet self-betrayal becomes habitual. You call it compromise. You call it being realistic. But what it really is despair wearing a polite mask. You start to notice that every relationship feels eerily similar, as if you're dating the same ghost wearing different faces. That's because you are the ghost of your own unhealed patterns, replaying the same script, hoping for a different ending. Sartre once wrote that hell is other people, but he didn't mean people are evil. He meant they reflect us too clearly. Love becomes unbearable when it exposes who you really are beneath the persona. That's why modern love collapses so easily, not because people don't care, but because they can't bear the mirror. The invisible consequence is not just broken hearts, it's a civilization losing its capacity for empathy. When we can't stay with discomfort, we can't stay with each other. When we can't face our own emptiness, we use others to fill it in, call it love. But the more we do that, the more love becomes impossible. You might think this is just personal, your failed relationships, your heartbreaks, your exhaustion. But this crisis is cultural. It's woven into the architecture of our minds. The algorithms that shape your desires, the advertisements that define beauty, the media that tells you what love should look like, all of it conspires to keep you unsatisfied. Because a person at peace doesn't consume. That's the quiet genius of modern capitalism. It sells loneliness back to you disguised as connection. It turns your hunger for love into an endless market of hope. Every click, every swipe, every promise of the one feeds the same machine that keeps you feeling incomplete. And so the cycle continues. You chase the next spark, the next story, the next maybe. This time you call it love, but it's really anesthesia. A way to avoid the unbearable silence of being alone with yourself, until one day the illusion breaks. Maybe it as a heartbreak that feels too familiar. Maybe it as the realization that you've been performing for so long you no longer remember who you are without an audience. Maybe it as the quiet thought at night, why does it all feel so empty? That's when the real question emerges, not how do I find love, but what have I been calling love all this time? And in that moment of clarity, painful as it is, you begin to sense the truth. The collapse of modern love isn't a tragedy. It's a mirror reflecting the parts of ourselves we can no longer ignore. Something inside you begins to shift the moment you realize that what you've been calling love was, in fact, a form of escape. You start to see that every heartbreak, every failed connection wasn't proof of your unworthiness. It was evidence that your soul refuses to settle for illusion. You can feel it, can't you? That subtle revolt stirring beneath the fatigue, the desire to reclaim something real, even if it means walking through loneliness first. This is where rebellion begins. Not against others, but against the falseness within yourself. The first act of rebellion is silence. You stop chasing, you stop explaining, you stop trying to prove your worth to people who only love fragments of you. In that silence, the noise of modern romance begins to fade, and a deeper frequency emerges, the sound of your own presence. It's uncomfortable at first, almost unbearable, because it's raw, it's unfiltered, but it's also the only place where truth can be heard. Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But most people never reach that privilege because they spend their lives trying to be who someone else will love. So when you finally stop running, the shadows you've been avoiding rise to the surface. The fear of being alone, the fear of being seen, the fear of never being enough, they all return, demanding your attention. And that's the moment you begin to do the real work, not of fixing yourself, but of meeting yourself. This is what Jung called shadow integration. learning to see the disowned parts of you, the anger, the neediness, the jealousy, the vulnerability, not as enemies, but as exiled children longing to come home. Every time you project those emotions onto a partner, you are handing them the keys to your unconscious. You're asking them to hold your pain for you. But love cannot carry what you refuse to own. So you begin to take it back, piece by piece. Every trigger becomes a teacher. Every disappointment becomes a mirror. Every goodbye becomes an initiation. You start to notice patterns that once felt random now make perfect sense. The partners you attract reflect the stories you still believe about yourself. The betrayals you experience echo your own self-abandonment. The love you seek outside mirrors the love you withhold inside. You begin to understand. Relationships don't fail because people are bad. They fail because truth is too heavy for fantasy to hold. And as you awaken to this, you see that the real cure for modern love isn't better communication techniques or clever dating strategies, it's consciousness. It's the radical act of becoming aware of the unconscious forces that drive you. When you know why you crave, why you cling, why you withdraw, you begin to break the pattern. In that awareness, something miraculous happens. You stop needing others to complete you and start meeting them as equals. You stop performing and start revealing. You stop confusing attention with affection, chemistry with connection, passion with presence. But this rebellion doesn't make you colder, it makes you cleaner. You begin to experience love not as possession, but as perception. You don't want to own someone. You want to witness them. You don't seek to merge and lose yourself. You want to meet and expand yourself. Real love is not a merging of two halves, it's the dance of two wholes. It's two people saying, I will not save you from your darkness, but I will hold the light as you walk through it. And that kind of love requires courage, because to love consciously means to risk seeing everything, the beauty, the wounds, the contradictions, and staying present anyway. It means choosing depth over comfort, truth over fantasy, soul over spectacle. It also means learning solitude not as loneliness, but as sovereignty, the ability to be with yourself without needing distraction, the space where your value is no longer dependent on anyone else's recognition. Nietzsche once said, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. That's what this stage feels like, a chaos slowly transforming into clarity. You stop fearing the void. You begin to dance with it. And from that dance, a new kind of relationship becomes possible, one not based on mutual dependency, but mutual expansion. Love ceases to be a drug that numbs your pain. It becomes a mirror that reveals your wholeness. You might still feel lonely sometimes. You might still ache for connection. But that loneliness no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like space, a sacred pause before the next unfolding. Because now you know, love cannot save you. It can only meet you at the depth you've already saved yourself. The rebellion, then, is not loud. It doesn't look heroic. It happens quietly in the moments you choose honesty over approval, self-respect over attachment, solitude over shallow company. It happens when you stop begging for love and start embodying it. This rebellion isn't against love itself. It's against the idea that love must hurt to be real, that you must lose yourself to be chosen, that romance is proof of worth. When you stop believing those lies, something extraordinary happens. The cage opens, and you realize it was never locked. There comes a moment, somewhere after the silence and the ache, when something inside you finally lets go. Not in defeat, but in understanding. You realize that love, true love, was never something you had to find, chase, or deserve. It was something that was always waiting for you, beneath the noise of wanting. You begin to see that the collapse of modern love isn't the death of connection, it's the death of illusion. What's crumbling isn't love itself, but everything false we've built around it. The myths of completion, the idealization of passion, the idea that another person can rescue us from ourselves. You understand now that all the pain, the cycles, the longing, it was never punishment, it was initiation. Every heartbreak was your unconscious dragging you toward consciousness. Every ending was an invitation to return to your center, and the truth hits you with quiet, devastating clarity. You were never broken. You were just searching for yourself in other people's eyes. The moment you see this, the machinery of need begins to dissolve. You stop reaching outward, not because you've given up on love, but because you finally found where it truly lives inside your capacity to be present, awake, and real. Love isn't something you get, it's something you become. Carl Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed. Real love, then, isn't about filling emptiness. It's about transformation. It's not a story of possession, but of expansion. It's not "I need you," but "I see you." That shift changes everything. When you stop needing, you start choosing. When you stop idealizing, you start to understanding. When you stop clinging, you start flowing. And perhaps, for the first time, love becomes what it was meant to be, not an escape from yourself, but a return to yourself. You begin to notice how differently the world feels through this new lens. There's a softness that replaces the old hunger. You no longer rush to fill silence. You let it breathe. You no longer chase intensity. You invite depth. You no longer demand certainty. You embrace mystery. It's strange, almost paradoxical, but the less you need love, the more it finds you. Not as fireworks, but as warmth. Not as obsession, but as peace. You begin to attract people who don't complete you, but complement you. People who challenge you, not to prove your worth, but to expand your awareness. And when love hurts, as it sometimes still will, you no longer collapse into despair. You watch the pain, hold it, let it move through you, because now you understand that pain, too, has wisdom. Every heartbreak is a teacher whispering, "This is where you still cling. This is where you still forget who you are." The ultimate truth, then, is both simple and terrifying. You cannot love another more deeply than you love your own truth. You cannot meet another more honestly than you've met your own shadow. And you cannot be truly seen until you've dared to see yourself. When you grasp this, love stops being a game of desire and becomes a practice of awareness. You stop looking for the one, because you realize there isn't just one. There are infinite reflections of consciousness meeting itself in different forms. Each relationship, brief or lifelong, becomes part of your evolution. Even loss begins to look different. You stop calling it failure. You start seeing it as completion, as to paths that crossed long enough to awaken something in each other and then moved apart, so that awakening could continue. There's grief, yes, but no resentment. Because when you truly love, you don't own, you witness. The philosophers understood this long before we did. Nietzsche called love the highest form of selfishness, not because it's narcissistic, but because it forces you to face the truth of your own existence. Sartre said that love is the desire to be loved by the freedom of another, a paradox that reveals the impossibility of control. And Jung, always the bridge between soul and psychology, believed that love's true purpose was individuation, the birth of the authentic self through the mirror of another. So when you ask, why is modern love collapsing? The answer is not despair, it's evolution. Humanity is outgrowing its illusions. We're learning that the fantasy of perfect union must die for genuine connection to live. Love, in its highest form, is not two people clinging to avoid loneliness. It's two souls walking side by side, facing the mystery together, holding space for each other's becoming. It's the courage to love without owning, to give without losing, to stay without possessing. And when you understand that, you no longer fear the collapse, you welcome it. Because you know what's falling apart is what was never real, and what remains, when the illusions burn away, is something uncheckable. Awareness, compassion, presence. You realize the ultimate paradox. Love was never meant to save you, it was meant to reveal you. So when the world tells you that modern love is dying, you can smile softly and whisper, no, it's being reborn, in the ones who dare to love without illusion. In the ones who have learned to sit with themselves, in the ones who no longer seek to escape through another, but to awaken through another, and maybe, just maybe, that's what love was trying to teach us all along.